I knew I should have brought whiskey to the office the day Bradley Thornton strolled into Apex Corp like he just invented capitalism. He walked through the revolving glass doors, wearing that smug Wall Street grin they hand out with every overpriced Master of Business Administration degree. The morning weather was bleak, with a freezing wind blowing off the lake and gray clouds hanging low over Chicago. When the elevator dinged open, there he was already talking about optimizing synergy to Clara, our receptionist, like she gave a damn. Clara had been working at Apex Corp for 12 years, and she was used to seeing arrogant executives come and go, but Bradley was a special breed. I watched from the back, quiet, clutching my coffee like it was a holy relic. He did not notice me. Of course he did not. Guys like Bradley never do. Not until it is too late. The ride to the 27th floor felt like a hostage situation. Bradley was holding the whole cabin captive with his booming voice, talking loudly about lean operations, cost compression, and efficiency metrics. He clearly did not realize that everyone in that elevator had been keeping this company running while he was still getting rejection letters from firms with real standards. Then came his punchline when he chuckled about meeting the legacy staff, referring to us with all the smug grace of a toddler holding a lighter near a gas leak. That was me. I was the legacy staff. I had spent 15 years of my life building the entire database integration, server backend, and buyer pipeline systems from scratch, back when Apex Corp was just a struggling technology shop in a drafty garage in Chicago. I remembered the early days of 2008 when we had no ventilation, wooden shelves instead of server racks, and barely enough money to cover our basic electric bill. I had written the original database code on a battered laptop, keeping the system running at 99% efficiency while the founders chased venture capitalists. I knew every line of code, every database trigger, and every server interface. By the time we hit the 27th floor, he had name-dropped several consulting firms, botched the pronunciation of synergetic, and called our chief financial officer by the wrong name. I stepped out first, took a long sip of bitter, burnt coffee, and exhaled through my nose like a bull prepping for slaughter. I already knew how this story would play out, or at least I thought I did. What I did not expect was the surgical efficiency with which our new chief operating officer, Brenda Jenkins, reassigned me. "Evolving your role," she said with a cold corporate smile. "We see you more in an advisory capacity moving forward, focusing on the long game." Her office had a wide view of the city skyline, but the atmosphere felt thin and cold. It was corporate speak for please go die quietly in a corner while the new kid takes credit for your life work. I smiled, said thank you, and nodded like a bobblehead at a tax seminar. I knew how to play the game of corporate survival. Then I walked back to my office, shut the door, and opened a fresh manila folder. I labeled it Bradley Thornton Paper Trail. I slid in a printed email chain I had been copied on for 2 years. That was the day I stopped using SharePoint and started using my desk printer like it owed me money. Bradley moved quickly. Within a week, I was removed from every strategy email thread I had once created. My calendar was blanker than his resume. He reassigned 2 of my top operations analysts, who were real talent, to his own team. He told them they would have more upward visibility under his leadership. They looked shell-shocked. One of them, a young man named Owen, mouthed a quick apology to me as he packed up his ergonomic chair. The other analyst, Peter, always wore headphones to tune out the office drama, but even he looked worried. I did not fight it. I did not beg. I just bought a new flash drive, backed up every pipeline, contact sheet, vendor chain, and investor note I had curated since 2008. I organized it by deal stage, labeling everything down to the scent of the boardroom at closing time. People think revenge is loud. Mine was a whisper, 1 kilobyte at a time. Bradley swaggered into our Thursday executive sync with a presentation deck he did not write, making a joke about how we used to do things. Every sentence had the oily sheen of someone who thinks speed equals brilliance. I took notes, not on what he said, but on who laughed. The final straw came when he called my work foundational, but dated during an acquisition preparation call. He said it with a grin right in front of the junior staff. "You have laid the groundwork, Jack," he smirked. "Now we build." I stared at the computer screen so long I started seeing spots. Then I closed my laptop, turned off the office light, and sat in the dark for 20 solid minutes, breathing through my teeth. Legacy staff, that was what he called me. I would show him what legacy really means. It started with the calendar invites. One by one, they disappeared like cockroaches under a kitchen light. First, it was the Thursday morning finance sync, then the internal readiness huddles. The ones I used to run were now completely gone from my view. Bradley must have revoked my visibility line by line, like he was chiseling my name off a tombstone. But I kept my focus, collecting physical receipts and documenting every system change he made without my approval. I spent my evenings reviewing the early agreements, preparing my legal strategy, and waiting for the right moment to strike. The next blow came on Monday morning when I logged in to upload a revised vendor sheet. Access denied. Just a red banner across my screen like a corporate middle finger. You do not have permission to view this file. I sent a polite email asking for access, and the reply from the system administrator was a masterclass in cowardice. Access to strategic growth folders is currently limited per request from Vice President Thornton. No apology, no explanation. It was as if I had been erased by a guy in a polo shirt and loafers. Bradley did not announce any of this publicly. That would have taken a spine. He operated like a cockroach, fast, hidden, and just greasy enough to squeeze through the cracks. He started holding acquisition prep meetings without me, taking over the sessions where I used to present. Then I noticed my junior team, 2 analysts, and a business development associate, so we're suddenly all looped in on initiatives that were completely new to me. I caught one of them in the break room, rehearsing a presentation slide he clearly did not build. When he saw me, he flinched like I was holding a weapon. Vice President Thornton wants it streamlined, he mumbled, looking down at his feet. He says centralized leadership is key during transition stages. I nodded slowly. He is right, I said. Just remember who taught you what centralized means. That night I stayed late. The office was dead silent, except for the janitor cleaning cart squeaking past the human resources office. I cracked open my fireproof drawer and pulled out a stack of printed binders I had not touched in years. These contained contracts, email threads, and version histories of our acquisition roadmap. I had every step of the buyer pipeline, every note I had made, and every red line I had fought to protect. I did not just have access to the bones of this deal. I grew the skeleton. By 11:47 in the evening, I was 6 cups deep into lukewarm coffee, and halfway through printing out a 202-page vendor proposal that still had my initials in the footer. The printer was warm, making low clicking sounds, and the smell of hot toner filled the room as the pages piled up in the plastic tray. I whispered to it like an old friend. Not yet, sweetheart, we still have work to do. I did not rage. I did not stomp into any one office. I took that fury and poured it into filing tabs, timestamps, and color-coded highlighters. Bradley thought he was deleting me, but all he was really doing was forcing me to build a better version of myself offline, untouchable and out of his reach. Bradley had even entered my office earlier that week, looking at my dual monitor setup, making a joke about how I preferred my physical mechanical keyboard to his slim tablet. He laughed at my stack of notebooks, calling them relics of a bygone age. He believed that everything in business could be simplified into a neat spreadsheet, but he did not realize that real operations are built on relationship details and system limitations. The junior analysts, Owen and Peter, were caught in the middle. Owen had a young family to support and could not afford to get on Bradley's bad side, while Peter tried to keep his head down. I told them both to do what they had to do. I would not hold it against them. I spent the next 3 hours organizing my physical folders, ensuring that every single page was double-checked. I organized the database tables, transaction records, shipping manifests, and API endpoints I had built over 15 years. I placed them in green, yellow, and blue binders. Many of the printed emails were dated back to 2008, showing the original agreements I made with the founders about database structures and code limits. If they wanted to play games with digital permissions, I would fight them with ink on paper. My physical evidence was something they could never delete with a mouse click. I sat at my kitchen table later that night, drinking a warm cup of chamomile tea, going over the numbers and formulas one more time to ensure my math was completely flawless. The acquisition deal value was an estimated $77 million. If Bradley pushed the database past its limits, he would cause a critical replication lag, resulting in an automatic system lockdown. My original system was built to handle maximum operations, but not without the safety checks. I had spent years of my life optimizing the server loads to ensure that we never experienced a single minute of downtime. To see a young executive throw that all away because of some spreadsheet formulas was painful, but I knew that physics did not care about corporate titles. I had documented everything, and now it was just a matter of waiting for the deal to close. I locked my office door, walked out into the cool night air, and felt a strange sense of anticipation. The corporate battlefield was shifting, and Bradley had no idea that his digital walls were completely useless against the physical trail of paper I had spent weeks creating. I drove home in the quiet Chicago streets in silence, knowing that the trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for the acquisition machinery to start turning, exposing their complete ignorance and incompetence. I knew something was coming. The moment Bradley swaggered into the Monday leadership sink, wearing that cologne that smelled like insecurity. He sat at the head of the table like he had been born there, not parachuted in 6 weeks ago by Brenda Jenkins to impress the board with fresh blood. The room buzzed with fake laughter and cautious eye contact, the kind you get right before a firing or a corporate reorg. Before we dive into metrics, Bradley said, smoothing his tie like he just won a lawsuit against humility, I want to share a quick update on the acquisition alignment presentation. He tapped the remote control, and the television on the far wall blinked awake. My stomach dropped. There, in all its plagiarized glory, was the pipeline architecture I had spent 9 months crafting, presented as his own framework. He had changed the font, stripped the color coding, and slapped a new title on top that read Optimized Buyer Funnel Third Quarter Expansion by B. Thornton. But the bones were mine, down to the staggered rollout sequence and the red-flagged vendor risks on slide 14. This is what I will be walking the buyers through. Next Friday, Bradley said, smiling like he'd just cured a disease. Jack will be supporting from the side as he has been instrumental in our foundational work. Supporting from the side. He looked right at me when he said it, and I swear that smirk of his was the kind only given by men who have never been told no. The room shifted subtly. A few executives looked down at their notebooks. One vice president of operations offered a hesitant nod, the same kind people give at funerals when they do not know what else to say. I nodded back, calm and controlled. I said nothing. I did not need to say anything. After the meeting, I slipped into my office, locked the door, and opened my encrypted flash drive. I created a new folder labeled Acquisition Original Materials. I dragged in the buyer contact timeline, the initial architecture drafts, the source files with metadata, and the correspondence from before Bradley arrived. It was the DNA of the deal. I also dragged the leaked presentation deck into a folder titled Plagiarized Materials. I made side-by-side comparisons, PDF timestamps, and email trails showing authorship. Bradley thought the battlefield was the boardroom. He did not realize I had already moved the war underground. The worst part was watching my own team pretend they did not see the theft. The same people I had gone to bat for now sat silent while a young hire in a suit rewrote my legacy in bullet points and buzzwords. But that silence was not permanent. I just needed to outlast it. And when it broke, I would make sure the sound was deafening. The message from George Henderson came in at 2:13 in the morning. My secure account pinged once. There was no subject line, just a file attachment named Transition Clause, Draft 3, and a short note under it. They kept your original language. Thought you should know. I downloaded the file and decrypted it using the old passphrase we had set up years ago during a corporate merger, Ghostwood. I remembered when we first met during a major database outage, back in 2015. I had stayed awake for 36 hours to restore the master server, earning George permanent respect. The document opened to page 4, paragraph 7. There it was, my words and my structure. Operational transition shall proceed in accordance with the pre-existing continuity plan, barring disputes of authority. I exhaled slowly. I read it again, then I clicked into the body of the paragraph and added a single sentence. In such cases, executive continuity will fall to the most tenured operations lead, effective immediately upon dispute recognition. I also drafted a memorandum detailing Bradley violations. First, he was committing a clear breach of fiduciary duty by presenting stolen intellectual property as his own to corporate buyers, violating securities laws regarding full disclosure and transparency, which would invite direct shareholder lawsuits. Second, I noted that his actions could constitute forgery under California Penal Code, Section 470, as he had doctored digital signatures on earlier transition drafts to bypass security limits and claim sole signing authority on behalf of Apex Corp. Third, his threats of immediate termination for the legacy operations staff. Without 90 days' notice violated the Federal Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, which would expose the parent firm to massive financial penalties and regulatory audits. I knew that George would review the modified clause with his legal team. They would recognize my writing style immediately, as we had drafted similar operational agreements during the Almer merger in 2016. George was a man who valued risk management above all else. He would understand that having me as the ultimate authority during the transition was the only way to ensure the buyers did not walk away. The clause sat quietly in the draft, a silent protector of my work. I flattened the PDF, re-encrypted it, and sent it back to George Henderson without a signature. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. Somewhere in a skyscraper 3 time zones away, George would read that sentence. He would know exactly what it meant, and he would not say a word because men like George did not need explanations. They just needed that clause to exist quietly, like a fire escape no one noticed until the building caught fire. I knew George would protect the transaction, and by protecting the transaction, he was protecting the system I had built. I slept soundly that night, knowing that my legal groundwork was solid, and the trap was quietly waiting in paragraph 7 of page 4, ready to be sprung when the time was right. The next morning, Bradley burst into the weekly all-hands meeting like a prom king who just found out the crown came with stock options. He stood up front in a tailored jacket too tight for his shoulders and delivered his updates like a man narrating his own documentary. "Deal momentum is strong," he declared. "Alignment is tight, and we are negotiating from a place of strength." The team applauded. I smiled and tapped my pen once against my notepad. They did not know the deal had a heartbeat because I had kept it alive behind the curtain. They did not know that beneath the spreadsheets, a single sentence now sat coiled in the legal structure, waiting. You could smell the tension before you even stepped into the room on Friday. That sterile, over-conditioned hotel conference room air mixed with the sweaty desperation of men trying to justify their titles. Everyone wore expensive navy blue suits like armor, clutching their coffee like it contained the last traces of their authority. The conference room was on the 12th floor of the Grand Regency Hotel, with large windows showing the rain streaking the glass and the gray waters of Lake Michigan in the distance. This was the final acquisition meeting, the showdown. I took my seat near the far wall, next to the coat rack, between a potted plant and a silent speakerphone unit. I had no laptop, just a small unlabeled manila envelope resting beside my folded hands. Across the room, Bradley held court like he was auditioning for a role in a movie he did not understand. He paced as he spoke, voice just loud enough to drown out nuance. "So to reiterate," he said, displaying a slide that could have been made by a junior intern, "we have streamlined operational continuity through vertical integration. The deal is locked, transition will be seamless, and we own the operations side." He flashed a smile at the buyer lead counsel, Diana Montgomery, a woman with cheekbones that could cut glass and a legal mind built of razors. She did not smile back, just tilted her head slightly. She was watching a child explain how airplanes work. "I do have a question," she said, her voice like chilled gin. "Section 7 references a continuity clause. I would like clarification on that language." Bradley waved it off like a mosquito. "Standard stuff," he said. "Boilerplate. It does not affect the buyer rights. All transition authority routes through my office. Legal knows that." He did not even glance in my direction. Diana Montgomery looked over at me. I did not move. I just placed one fingertip on the edge of the envelope, giving it a gentle nudge. Bradley was still talking about synergies and value acceleration, dropping corporate jargon like he thought they would explode into credibility. The lead investor, George Henderson, sat at the far end of the table, calm and watching. He had not said a word yet, which was the financial world version of God clearing his throat. As I was saying, Bradley continued, spinning the presentation remote in his hand. We have pre-aligned all department heads. There is no ambiguity on who is steering the ship. That is why I have taken point on this. The slide behind him showed an organizational chart with his name glowing at the top. My name was gone, erased like a typo. Bradley thought no one would notice. Diana Montgomery turned a page in her binder slowly. She paused on slide 14, looking closely at the vendor risk section. This seems to contradict your operational summary, she noted, her voice sharp and clear. You have marked these vendor pipelines as fully integrated, yet the risk model shows severe bottlenecks that could halt system operations. Bradley's face flushed slightly, and he gave a nervous laugh. That is just legacy data, he said, waving his hand dismissively. We have bypassed those old bottlenecks. All operations now run directly under my stream. Diana did not look convinced. She turned back to her documents, marking a page with a yellow tab. George Henderson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. That envelope beside me was still untouched. Because you do not have to raise your voice when the words are already planted. You do not need to interrupt a man digging his own grave. You just quietly hand him a sharper shovel. Bradley was still going, his voice rising as he tried to regain control of the room, showing signs of frustration under his tight shirt collar. Point is, he said, clapping his hands together, this deal runs smooth because I have simplified the handoff. We have got alignment, we have got vision, and frankly, we have got control. That is how we do things at Apex Corp under our new management. He smiled again, and then, right on cue, he said the line I had waited 3 months to hear. Do you know who I am? The room finally stopped breathing. Diana Montgomery was mid-sentence, parsing a clause with all the precision of a surgeon slicing open a tumor, when Bradley interrupted her loudly with an arrogant hand gesture. Look, he said, his voice rising with that frat boy confidence. Do you know who I am? It was not a question. It was a challenge, the kind you throw out when you have cornered yourself in a lie and think volume will rescue you. The silence that followed was heavy, and the fan of the projector seemed to grow louder in the quiet room. George Henderson watched Bradley with a cold, analytical gaze, waiting for the final collapse. The room froze. Diana Montgomery pen paused mid-glide. The junior analyst, who had been nervously chewing on his pen cap, stopped mid-bite. Even the projector seemed to hold its breath. I did not move for a second. Then slowly I reached over, picked up the manila envelope, and pulled out a single matte black business card. No logo, no title, just white lettering on thick stock. Jack Prescott, Executive Advisor, Operations Continuity. I slid it across the table to Diana Montgomery without a word. She picked it up delicately, turned it over, and her eyebrows ticked upward. Then she looked up at George Henderson. George did not say a word. He just leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a smirk. Then he turned to Bradley. Actually, son, do you know who he is? Bradley blinked, then blinked again. For the first time since he stepped foot into this company, he did not have a word to say. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Diana Montgomery gently placed the business card down on the binder in front of Diana. She flipped a few pages, then she found it. Clause Summary Transition Protocols. Her voice, when it came, was silk wrapped around a dagger. Funny, she said. This name matches the signature metadata embedded in our earliest clause draft. You would not happen to know how that language got in here, would you? Bradley looked down at his folder, flipping pages like maybe there was an escape hatch hiding between the lines. George Henderson just chuckled. Sit down, Bradley, he said. Not loud, not harsh, just final. Bradley sat down because there was nothing else to do. I sat perfectly still, hands folded, breathing steady. I did not gloat. Diana Montgomery opened her thick folder, moving with surgical precision. She flipped the page and read it word for word. In such cases, executive continuity will fall to the most tenured operations lead, effective immediately upon dispute recognition. The silence that followed was heavy. You could hear Bradley's throat click as he swallowed hard. His face turned pale. This was not in the last draft, he stammered, flipping through his folder. Diana Montgomery tilted her head. It is in the signed one, she said, sliding her copy across the table, the one with the ink still fresh, my clause, my words, my signature hidden deep in the metadata. Bradley looked to Brenda Jenkins, the chief operating officer. Brenda did not even blink. She immediately realized the legal danger and decided to protect her own career. She knew that if she associated herself with Bradley's actions, the board would hold her responsible for the plagiarism and potential forgery. She simply stood up, walked behind Bradley's chair, and took his company tablet. No eye contact, no speech, just a soft nod toward the hallway. The kind of nod that said your services are no longer required. Bradley froze, then looked at me. I met his eyes like he was already in the rearview mirror. Bradley stood up slowly, shoulders sagging, and walked out. He looked down at the table like maybe somewhere his name would still be recognized, but it was not. He walked past Clara at the reception desk, his career completely finished. I watched the rain continue to hit the hotel windows, the gray light reflecting off the glass. The entire room remained silent as the legal counsel finalized the transfer documents. Brenda Jenkins was quiet, looking down at her notepad, refusing to meet my eye. She had supported Bradley to look good in front of the board, but now she was forced to sign the transition protocols under my terms. George Henderson smiled, offering me a firm handshake as the meeting adjourned. I knew that my years of quiet dedication had finally paid off, not because I made a scene, but because I had built something that could not be replaced. I walked out of the hotel lobby into the cool afternoon air, feeling a deep sense of relief. My career at Apex Corp was over, but my legacy was secure. Diana Montgomery spoke again. We will proceed with Jack Prescott as our liaison. His original architecture aligns more closely with investor risk models, and he has a pre-existing trust record with our team. George Henderson leaned forward. We are investing in stability, not bluster, he said. That was it. The nail in the coffin, delivered with the calm of a man who signs checks bigger than most people's retirements. I did not watch him go. Instead, I looked back at the conference table. George Henderson handed me a slim, dark folder. Inside was a formal invitation to join the strategic committee of the parent firm, reporting directly to the board. No fluff, no preamble, just legacy on paper. I sat down, one hand resting on the new offer folder. I decided right then that I would not take a full-time position. I preferred my independence, working as a high-level advisor on my own terms. This settlement and licensing agreement would secure my financial freedom permanently, allowing me to focus on my own projects and watch my son Owen graduate from medical school next month without a single dollar of student debt. No gloating, no dramatics, just peace. The kind that comes from knowing you do not need to be loud to win. You just have to outlast the noise long enough to become the silence that follows. Big thanks to the legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the corporate chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.